Okay. Whether you're studying the SAT or ACT, welcome to Concept 105. I know it says SAT sheet here, but the concept's applicable to both tests. Um, so interestingly, on both the SAT and ACT, the worksheets I've made, there are 10 for the SAT. Only 103 and 105 test for content. They're the only worksheets that have to do with understanding the context of the question rather than knowing specific grammar rules. And for the ACT, out of 8 worksheets, 103 and 105, same for those, only ones where you need to gather context. So let's talk about what exactly we need to do well on this concept. And let me actually make this a little bigger. So for transitions, it's really important to do your homework. And what I mean by doing your homework is 2 things. You need to understand what you're coming from and what you're going to. So you want to read a few sentences prior to the transition. So you want to read before or prior to the transition. And err on the side of collecting too much information. Because really you can decide what to leave off. But you want to know before the transition. We'll call that kind of A. And then you need to figure out how you get to B, which is after the transition. And once you decide that relationship, you can pick the appropriate transition. Here's the thing, though. The thing is that it's not just as simple as defining the relationship between these 2 things. You have to really know the transition words. And although you may recognize the transition word, you have to push yourself to say, do I actually know what this means? So we'll talk about a strategy for that on this worksheet, but you're going to have to do some homework prior in order to be prepared for the test. But you need to know definitions, exact definitions of transition words. Say exact def of transition words. And we'll talk about that. So what we'll do is we'll look at a few examples I made, talk strategy. Then we'll apply the strategy to actual test problems, and then we'll do the same for diction. But let's do transitions first. Okay. So when you read this, you'll see it's all about understanding point A and how to get to point B. All right. Take a moment to look at this example. Well, you can't because my bulbous head is in the way, so I will move it, put it right there. Okay. Take a moment to read this and see what you think as far as answers go. So it says, however, Sarah felt prepared for a job as a mime once she turned old enough to leave home. And the question is however the right transition word? And the answer is, we have absolutely no idea. Why? Because we haven't collected the right amount of information. We should be reading 2 to 3 sentences up to know what we're transitioning from. Yes, we do have B. We do have what we end up going into. But we don't know what A is, so we can't make a decision. Moral of the story, make sure you zoom out and read before. Okay, let's look at the same exact example now, except we have 2 sentences prior. We have these 2 sentences. So Sarah was the 5th of 7 children, and thus she was often ignored. While her brothers and sisters were playing, Sarah would sit alone in a chair, often quietly thinking of her favorite silent movie actor, Charlie Chaplin. However, Sarah felt prepared for her job as a mime once she turned old enough to leave home. I actually wouldn't even read it with the however. I pretend like that's not there. So think about A, think about B, and determine in your mind how they're connected. Now let's look at the transitions. So it's not a however, because she has experience with silent movies. So feeling prepared would come from the experience. So there's no contrast. Consequently, that is the correct answer. You need to know what this word means, though, in order to be able to execute on your knowledge of the relationship between these 2. Consequently means as a result or as a consequence. So because of her spending time thinking about silent movies and being aware of silent movies, she felt comfortable being a silent actor or a mime. So this is a result or a consequence of what came before. Similarly, I'm going to caution you on this very, very carefully. If you see anything that signals a comparison, make sure a comparison is actually there. In this case, nothing is being compared. And then this is just me being lazy, but it's not answer choice day. All right. Anyway, let's look at these two steps. And I know I mentioned them, but I just want to reiterate the point. You need to know exactly what comes before, a couple sentences ahead of the transition sentence, and then you need to know what comes after the transition. I would do exactly what I didn't do there, which is I would read it without the transition and make a decision how they're connected. Just as important, though, as understanding the relationship is making sure you actually know these transition words. Yes, it's easy to say, I've seen these words before, but what you really need to challenge yourself on is, can you actually group it with synonyms? Do you know what is synonymous with this transition word? Because if you can group transition words together, you know which ones would fit in certain circumstances and which ones wouldn't. Fortunately, or lucky for you, because you have this worksheet, you have this chart here. So what you have with this chart is you have, I believe it's 10 different types of categories of transitions, and you have words that fit those categories. So introduces a specific example to support the preceding claim. Well, that would be for example or for instance. This one provides the consequence versus provides the reason. We're going to go more into detail because this is one that students get really tripped up on. But anyway, I would definitely advise you to read through this table during your own time. And not only that, but to add words into the categories and add some of your own categories. But let's talk about the difference between consequently and because. So it's actually quite simple. Because gives the reason that something else happened. So because I worked hard, I received a raise. So working hard is the reason the raise happened. Consequently does the opposite. Consequently gives the result. So I worked hard is the reason. The result, consequently, I received a raise. So it's just important to understand the difference between because and consequently, and not to conflate them as being the same, and also to be able to group the words that fit with one another. So since is synonymous with because, whereas therefore, thus, as a result, accordingly, they're all synonymous with consequently. All right, let's try a few transition problems from the test. So let's take a moment to look at number 1 here. I know I'm always changing colors. I'm like a chameleon. Anyway, following the lunar calendar, this type of farming is driven by the belief that the moon influences levels of moisture in the soil, just as the moon's gravitational pull affects great bodies of water. So the moon influences levels of moisture in the soil. That's a big part of the A, the before. Lunar farmers ignore that from the new moon to the quarter moon phases, when the moon is waxing, a soil's moisture content increases, whereas drier periods occur during the waning phase. So we want to know, this is telling us what lunar farmers believe, and it's giving a specific belief. It's saying that people who follow the lunar calendar, lunar farmers, they see that soil content increases during a certain phase of the moon, and then it decreases during another phase of the moon. So based off of that, if we're talking about the moon influencing levels of moisture in the soil, this would actually be A. It would be an example. It's an example of how the moon can play a role in that. And again, you just want to make sure you know these words. So look up anything you don't. You know, thereafter is sequence of events, comes after something. Contrast, there has to be some type of comparison, however, is some type of contradiction. Anyway, let's look at 3. 3 gets a lot of people. So we have the astonishing size and range of Swarthmore's donation. Digitizing this cornucopia of handwritten recipes in order to make them available to readers was a challenge. So we have a challenge, and the challenge has to do with the size and range of the donation. So this is going to be A. So the reason is that the size and range of the donation is large, and what results is that making it available is a challenge. So because of such a vast and large donation, figuring out how to make it all available is a challenge. And again, encourage you to look up any one of these transitions. Let's do one more, number 6. Demand for, so again, we'll look at A here, B, and we'll ignore the transition. So demand for physical therapists is high in many areas of the United States. The current state of the profession is strong, and the future looks even stronger. So this is all positive stuff about physical therapists. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2008, there will be a 30% more jobs in the field than there were in 2018 than there were in 2008. That's also very positive. So we go from positive to positive. So it's not going to be any type of contrast. That gets rid of, actually, the interesting thing is A and C are actually synonyms. That's in the chart up above. So if it's not one, it's not the other one, which is kind of nice to know. At present, well, we're not really talking about time. We're talking about in 2018, so we don't really know. That's presumably sometime in the future from this, because it says there will be. So it's going to be in fact. In fact, it just allows you to kind of reiterate your point, to reassert what you meant. So it's a positive, and then we're reasserting that positive. Okay, let's take a brief look at diction. This will be a little faster. So with diction, it's all about 2 things: the context, so understanding what the sentence is saying, and then the second thing after the context is just knowing word definitions, looking up words. So in this case, we have Adhita never yielded in the face of adversity, developing a reputation as a something person. So never yielding means that you're tenacious. It helps to know the definition of tenacious. Tentative means you're uncertain or unsure. Tactile relates to kind of feeling, your senses. Tacit means implied, like a tacit nod is kind of one where you're just kind of implying it's okay. Or tacit approval is just kind of when it's someone, may I go to the bathroom? And the teacher kind of goes, that's just tacit approval. But anyway, here's a definition for tenacious, being determined. So again, helps to know definitions. But let's look at a few examples. We'll look at 2 here. All right, so 35 first. Whereas Victorian society was fascinated by the camera's ability to document detail without ornament, Cameron something artifice, carefully choosing her subjects and controlling each sitting to express her own unconventional, sometimes whimsical sense of the world. So she, unlike Victorian art as a whole, is trying to show trickery, and that's her specific approach. So if that's what she's doing, she's embracing artifice as her approach. She's embracing kind of trickery as her approach. Encompassed is to completely surround. So is enveloped, and embellish is to exaggerate. Where encompass is really to include, whereas envelop is to surround. Anyway, always encourage you to look up the definitions as well. I chose 42 because I've seen this actually 3 times on the SAT, and 3 times is enough where I want to point it out. So it's confusing sites versus sites. So competition from the online booking agency, sites that allow consumers direct access to information that used to be available only to professionals has led to an important shift in the industry. So because it's an online booking agency and we're defining it, we're talking about websites. This sites is seeing, and then this sites is like a work cited, like when you cite your work. Some people call it a bibliography. But that's the difference between those 3 different types of site. Okay. Anyway, I hope that these explanations and these few practice problems are helpful. I encourage you to do the worksheet, submit your answers on under your account, your UES online account, and hopefully this part of the test starts to feel a lot easier and you feel like you have a clear strategy. Good luck.